Ezras Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Menachos Daf Nun Ches, number 58, and we will begin from Daf Nun Zayin Amid Beis, where we left off by the two dots. The Gemara is discussing. I don't know how it comes in. I mean, since we talked about lechem upon him and shtei lechem, so this comes in and as an idea. The Chumash says in Parshas Tzav that after you take the kamitza, the leftovers, vayneseres, the leftover of the mincha goes to Aaron and his kids. Kodesh Kadashim Hu Mish Hashem. They eat it. The leftover of the mincha, they eat it. In fact, it's like matzah, but they can, fry it in oil, put cream cheese on it. It's their food. Then the Mishnah said, then the pasuk says, every mincha shetakriva Hashem lo yiseh chametz. Don't make it chametz. Right? No mincha is allowed to be chametz, which we saw yesterday. And then the Torah tells you that from the two types of mincha, one type of mincha is made with sa'or, and that is the shtei halechem. Remember this, the two breads? You see this kohen holding the two breads? So this bread was made with actual yeast. So there, you don't make a kamitza on the bread and throw it on the mizbeach. That's what the Chumash is saying. Also, the Torah is telling you, because it's chametz, and the Torah doesn't want chametz on the mizbeach, and this is the mizbeach, so you don't make a chametz and burn it on the mizbeach. Then the Chumash says, v'chol davash. What is honey? Honey refers to bikurim. The bikurim, the fruits of the bikurim, one of them was tamarim, dates. So you don't throw the dates on the mizbeach. It just belongs to, I guess it's given to the kohen, right? But carbon ratios takrivu oisam lashem. Then the Torah tells you that there's carbon ratios takrivu oisam lashem. Don't think it's not a carbon. It is like a carbon, the shtei alechem and the bikurim. But Chumash says ve'al mizbeach lo yalu. Don't burn it on the mizbeach. Okay, and then the Torah tells you make sure you have salt. Now we darshan a few things from this pasuk. Tanur Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, how do I know? Lamala mibsar chatas. Someone who burns on the mizbeach, he puts on the mizbeach and throws it onto the bonfire, mibsar chatas, the meat of the carbon chatas. Who eats the meat of the carbon chatas? The kohen, right? And not we're talking about not the fats, but the meat. Or mibsar osham, or the meat of the carbon asham, sar kache kachim, or the meat of the two sheeps of the atzeres, of the shtei alechem. Remember the shtei alechem. Part of this is you see what he holds, the two lechem and the two sheep. Right over here is a nice picture. Those sheep are shlomims, but they're shalmei tzibur, which is kache kachim. They were supposed to be eaten with the kahanim. What happens if somebody burns it on the mizbeach? Or mikachim kalim, a regular kachim kalim, like a regular shlomim. We maisara oimer, or the leftover of the carbon oimer of the mincha that was brought on the second day of Pesach, which was made out of barley. Or a guy takes the shtei alechem, and whatever of the two lechem, the two breads, he burns it on the mizbeach. So if a guy takes the two breads and throws it on the mizbeach, or lechem upon him, or the lechem upon him, he puts on the mizbeach, or the leftover of mincha. All these things don't belong on a mizbeach, right? You're supposed to be eaten by the kahanim. So if a guy took it and wants to be extra frum and puts it onto the mizbeach to burn, you get a big lav. Why? Because the Torah tells you, now the Torah is telling you that the entire lechem upon him and bikurim, don't burn it on the fire. Don't burn it on the mizbeach. Why didn't the Torah write isha l'shem? Don't put it on the fire. What does mimenu teach me? So kol shehu mimenu liishem arehu babal taktiru. The Torah is telling you another din, and that is that there's certain carbonas that if there are certain carbonas that if you burned it on you burn part of it on the fire, the rest of the carbon, you're not allowed to put it on the fire. And if you put it on the fire, you get an avera loy saktiro. So if part of the carbon were burnt on the fire, then you're not allowed to be makter it on the mizbeach. The leftovers, you're not allowed to be makter on the mizbeach. So that makes sense. By every karban chatas, you're throwing the fats on the mizbeach. So the Torah tells you you're not allowed to throw the meat on the mizbeach. So that leaves you with the obvious question: is the shtei lechem leftovers, or the lechem upon him leftovers? That's part of it is burned on the fire. The entire bread of the lechem, of the shtei lechem and the lechem upon him, are just eaten by the kahanim. So what does that mean? What part of it is belonging on the mizbeach, where the Torah says the other part, the leftover, you're not allowed to throw on the mizbeach? Of Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, there's nothing going on the fire with the lechem upon him and the shtei lechem. You don't even have to bring it close to the mizbeach. You're right. Shtei lechem and the lechem upon him don't touch the mizbeach, right? There's a part of the of a mincha that we actually walk over to the mizbeach and you just touch it. The shtei lechem don't have that. However, they are connected with a carbon that's brought on the mizbeach. The shtei lechem you saw is connected with the two sheep, and the lechem upon him is connected with the two spoons of ketoris that was on the shulchan. So once those ended up on the mizbeach, then you could eat the lechem upon him and shtei lechem respectively. So they are connected to something that's brought on the mizbeach. Therefore, the Torah tells you that the shtei lechem and the lechem upon him are not allowed to be brought on the mizbeach. Okay, now we learned until then you're not allowed to bring it on the mizbeach. Itma, we learned hamala mekulam al keves hamizbeach. Let's say you burn it, you go bring it up instead of burning it on the main mizbeach. What happens if you burn it on the ramp of the mizbeach? So Rabbi Yochanan says yechayev. So if you burn the karban chatas on the ramp of the mizbeach, you're liable. Rabbi Laza amapata. Rabbi Yochanan amachayev. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa hamizbeach ainly on the mizbeach. The Torah says it's also to burn these things on the mizbeach. Keves minayim. How do you know burning it on the ramp? Talmud loima be'el hamizbeach lo yala rotzai. Torah is telling you that even the burning it on something like the mizbeach, it's not pleasant by God, so to speak. It's not the rotzai Hashem. So therefore, we learn from there that all these things that we mentioned, the lechem upon the sarchatas, asham, anything that you're supposed to be eaten by the kahanim, if you decide to burn it on the ramp of the mizbeach, even the ramp of mizbeach, you're liable. Rabbi Laza says you're potter. Why? My tama the amakra the pasuk says soor udvash carbon ratios takriva oisim Hashem. The shtei alechem, which is soor, and the bikurim, those are karbanas, right? And the Torah says oisam. So we darshan oisam hu du rabbi loch keves mizbeach. Only by the bikurim and by the carbon shtei alechem do we say that you're not allowed to bring it on a mizbeach, and you're not allowed to bring it on the ramp. So only two, according to Rabbi Laza, are not allowed to be burned on the ramp. Everything is not allowed to be burned on the mizbeach, all that list. But two have a special isser of being burned on the ramp, which is the carbon, which is the shtei alechem, and the bikurim. Not allowed to even burn that on the ramp. But the others, you don't get an avera if you burn it on the ramp. So if you took the basara chatas and burned it on the ramp, according to Rabbi Laza, you're not liable. We go to Amid Aleph. Rabbi Yochanan, hi Oisam, my Avidlate. Rabbi Laza learned it from Oisam. Oisam have this din of the ramp, but Rabbi Yochanan did not learn. Rabbi Yochanan learned everything is also to burn on the ramp. So the question is, what's Rabbi Yochanan going to do with the word Oisam? Answers the Gemara, he teaches you another concept. He teaches you another idea. I would have thought that an individual, he could decide to make a shtei alechem as a nedava. He wants to donate the 2 breads to the Eibishter. And what you're going to do is, let's say you make a kmitz and throw it on the mizbeach. That's what I would thought. The koire ba, and if someone says, I make a neder that I'm going to bring shtei alechem, I'm donating 2 breads to the Eibishter. The Torah tells you if you make a neder, you have to keep it. So if someone would make such a neder, I would think he has to keep it. Talmud loima carbon ratios takrivu, that these things are brought takrivu. They were only allowed by the congregation to bring shtei alechem on Shavuos. The lo yachid individuals not allowed to bring shtei alechem. Okay, maybe an individual is not allowed to bring the shtei alechem because he never brings the shtei alechem. Aval tzibur maybe, but maybe a tzibur could go ahead and donate from the Trumas Halishka, from their tzedakah money, a new shtei alechem, even if it's not Shavuos, because shemaybe because during Shavuos they're bringing a shtei alechem, right, from the tzibur. So let's say all year round, if the tzibur decides to bring a shtei alechem, maybe they're allowed to do so. That's why the pasuk says oisam. Only at that time, them specifically, they're unique for Shavuos and nothing else. Ma yesh l'chol lahavi. When? What are you supposed to bring? Shtei alechem min ha'sa'ar ubikurim min ha'davash. Only those two are sa'ar and davash. That's it. The only bikurim. You can't donate bikurim and you can't donate your new shtei alechem. So you just told me that the tzibur cannot bring their own shtei alechem. In fact, nobody can bring their own shtei alechem, even an individual, right? An individual can also not. Says the Gemara, "Ushtei alechem lo yikrivu d'dava." They never brought a shtei alechem as a donation. Well, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, in Memra Kol Sa'ar, the Torah tells you that any part of the shtei alechem, you're not allowed to bring on the mizbeach. You're not allowed to take a piece of the shtei alechem, a piece of the challah, and burn it on the mizbeach. Any part. Lama nema kol davash, and the Torah is telling you you're not allowed to take one little fruit of the one little piece of honey of date and throw it on the mizbeach. But the Torah uses the word kol, right? The Torah uses the word kol sa'ar, kol davash. Now it could have said kol sa'ar v'davash. Why did it say kol by each? So that's the Brice's question. Lama nema kol davash. Nema kol davash. Lama nema kol sa'ar. If it's saying the word kol by the honey, why does it say the word kol by the sa'ar? Because yesh b'sa'ar ma'she'im b'davash, yesh b'davash ma'she'im b'sa'ar. Remember, there's the word sa'ar means shtei alechem. The word davash means bikurim. There's something unique about shtei alechem that's not by bikurim, and there's something unique by bikurim which is not by shtei alechem. Sa'ar, and the reason why, by the way, again, the reason why we're calling shtei alechem sa'ar, because if you see the picture, the guy put sa'ar. In making it, you put a little yeast in there before you make it. So why? Sa'ar, says the Brisa, huter miklale b'migdash. You're allowed to bring the shtei alechem. It sounds like it. You're allowed. There's an exception to the shtei alechem that sometimes it was brought on the mizbeach. Davash lehuter miklale b'migdash, but we never find that you throw a date onto the mizbeach. But so therefore, sa'ar is more unique. So is more unique. That's why it says kol sa'ar, that even a little part of the shtei alechem doesn't belong on the mizbeach. Davash huter b'shiari menachos. The date it can be used when you're eating the leftover of menachos. You're allowed to use bikurim was brought from all the 7 fruits, right? So one of the 7 fruits is olive oil, right? You're allowed to fry the shiari menachos and eat it. They're allowed to fry the matzah that they received, the leftover matzah, in oil. So we see that the kehanim have specialty, it's used in the Beis HaMikdash. Sa'ar, but Sa'ar was never allowed to. A Kayan was not allowed to bring, is not allowed to make his carbon mincha, the part that he's going to eat, into chametz. So maybe chametz has strictness, and then we find that davash has strictness. That's why it had to say kol by each. There's a strictness by sa'ar which is not by dvash, and there's a strictness by dvash not by sa'ar. That's why the Chumash had to say kol sa'ar, kol dvash. Torah had to say all sa'ar and all dvash. Now, what does that mean? Sa'ar, the Brisa, this is one long question, but the point of the question is that the sa'ar sometimes was brought onto the mizbeach. So our Dehut Meklaba Mikdash by Nihu, what was that? allowed? When were you allowed to bring the two breads onto the mizbeach? A kaimitz of the two breads on the mizbeach. Lav shteha lechem the karvan nedava. It's talking about not the shvuas two breads, but if in the middle of the year the tzibur decides to bring two breads as a donation, they would make a kmitza and throw it on the mizbeach. So we see that that during the year you're allowed to make shteha lechem and throw it on the mizbeach. And says the Gemara, Amar Rav Amram, nah, that's not what it's talking about. Loy, you're never allowed to make shtei alechem, and even on Shavuos, nothing of the shtei alechem was thrown on the mizbeach. But what does it mean that the shtei alechem was on the mizbeach? Likariv imohem. It's referring to the two sheep, as we mentioned. That part of the shtei alechem is really connected to the two sheep, as you can see in the picture where he does a tenufa with the sheep inside of it, and the sheep is thrown on the mizbeach. So we see that's what was the strictness of the exception of Sa'ar, which part of the Sa'ar, which is the sheep, was thrown on the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, Ikachi Bikurim Nami. Every Bikurim also had like karbonos thrown on the Mizbeach. The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Hagoy's Lois, Al Gabi Asalin. They used to bring birds onto the baskets full of the first fruit. Hoya oilers, they would bring them as carbon oilers. So again, when the people would come with bikurim, they also came with the first fruits and a bunch of birds on it. So therefore, we see that there was some carbonis connected with the bikurim. So it wasn't unique to the shtei alechem. And vasalim should be yodem l'tanim kahanim, and even they left the baskets they were given for kahanim. And says the Gemara, there's a big difference. The sheep is very integral part of the shtei alechem. You had to bring those sheep. But hani, the birds that they brought on the basket, it wasn't a have to. Just to add colors to the basket of fruit that you gave, so you added a bird, but you didn't have to do that. So therefore, really, no part of the bikurim ended up on the mizbeach, whereas part of the shtei alechem ended up on the mizbeach, not the shtei alechem itself, but the sheep. So now the Gemara asks on a question. Boyer Rami Bachama Merav Chizda. We learned that if something, let's say a regular carbon chatas, or animal carbon chatas, so you bring the fats on the mizbeach, the Torah tells you the rest of the meat, you're not allowed to burn on the mizbeach, but only because you brought the fats on the mizbeach. So now Rami Bachama asked the question from Rav Chizda. Let's say somebody puts if you brought a bird as a chatas, right? Sometimes you could bring a bird, and none of that was supposed to be brought on the mizbeach. The entire bird was supposed to be eaten by the kahanim. So it's only the blood that you sprinkle, you squeeze on the mizbeach, but the meat was entirely eaten by the kahanim. Maho, what happens if you do that? Will you be over an avera? Only a regular chatas, which has some of it brought on the fire, the fats. There, the Torah says, don't bring the meat onto the mizbeach. But a bird, there's nothing brought on the fire in the first place. So there is no so there should be no issa to bring the bird, the msar chatas, onto the mizbeach. Or maybe kol sheshmoi carbon, b'hainami shmoi carbon. This is a carbon. You see, the Torah says mimenu ishal Hashem, carbon. Here, see the word carbon? So the Torah connects the word carbon. Anything that's a carbon that's not supposed to be on the mizbeach, loy saktiru. Don't put it on the mizbeach. So maybe that's the din. So the Gemara says kitanoi. Amalei. So Rav Chizda said kol sheshmoi carbon, b'hainami shmoi carbon. Rav Chizda agreed with one side and said that the basar chatas oif, you get an avera if you put it on the mizbeach. It's supposed to be eaten by the kahanim. It's not supposed to be burned on the mizbeach. And kitanoi, it's a machlekes tanoim. Reb Lezer says kol shemimenu ishim, that anything that part of it was supposed to be burnt on the mizbeach, the leftover you have an iser to burn it on the mizbeach. Rabbi Kiva says kol sheshmoi carbon. Anything that's called a carbon is not allowed to be on the mizbeach. My benai, what's the difference between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Lezer? Or Rabbi Chizda, that's what the difference is. Basar chatas oif ika benayo. A chatas oif, a bird chatas. A bird chatas is not brought on the mizbeach. Any part of it shouldn't is not. There's no fats brought on the mizbeach. Therefore, according to Rabbi Lezer, if you bring the basar chatas oif on the mizbeach, you're not liable. Rabbi Kiva says, since it's called a carbon, and carbon that's supposed to be eaten by the kahanim, you have an avera of loisaktiru memenu isha l'shem. Rav says, the difference between is that the loig of oil of the Mitzvah, as you know, he had some of the oil that was sprayed towards the Peroiches, part of his carbon, and then the leftover oil was eaten by the Kahanim. So that was never, you never brought any part of that oil on the Mizbeach. The Tani Levi said, Kol Karbonim, L'Rabbeis Loig Shemesh HaMetzoiner, that Kol Karbonim is supposed to be eaten by the Kahanim, that even the loig oil of a Metzora is a gift to the Kahanim, but it's not part of it on the Mizbeach. So what happens if the Kohen threw the loig shemen of Metzora on the Mizbeach? According to Rabbi Akiva, it's called a carbon. You're going to be chayiv, Kol Karbonim. And according to Rabbi Lezer, it's not going to be chayiv if you burn it on the Mizbeach, because no part of the loig shemen goes on the mizbeach, unlike an animal, which part of the animal, the fats, goes on the mizbeach, so the rest you have an avera. But the loig shem and shematzaira, no part of it goes on the mizbeach, and therefore, according to Rabbi Lezer, there's no avera if you throw it onto the mizbeach. Tana Rabbanim. Sa'ar bal taktiru, ainli ela kuloi. You're not allowed to throw the entire shtei alechem on the mizbeach. Let's say you put a little piece of the shtei alechem on the mizbeach. Talmud loimek kol, everything, even anything, even a little bit. Eruve menayim. Let's say you mix the shtei alechem with something else, the sa'or with something else. You mix the sa'or with something else. It became part. You take a drop of the shtei alechem and mixed it with rice or something like that. Talmud loimet kichol, anything that has a little bit of sa'or in it, you're not allowed to put on the mizbeach. My ka'amar, what's this Bryce exactly saying? Omar Abaya hachi kamar, sa'or bal taktiru, ainli ela kazayas. You only learn from the pasuk a kazayas. That means that what fits into your hand, according to Abaya. Chatzi zayas min nolan. How do you know if you throw a half a kazayas on the mizbeach of the shtei alechem? You take a half of zayas of the shtei alechem, you pull a little piece. How do you know you're going to be liable? Talmud loimek kol. Eruve menayin. How do you know if I mixed a little piece of the shtei alechem into something else, like rice, and then throw that on the mizbeach? Talmud loimek ki kol. So Abaya holds that even a half a zayas, even a half a olive's worth of sa'or is not allowed to be on the mizbeach. Rav Ama Hachikama. So or bal taktiru is ainly ela koimitz. I only know if you do the kmitza of the shtei alechem. Chatzi koimitz menayim, Talmud loy mekol. Eruve menayim, Talmud loy mekikol. So it seems that Rav is saying the same as Abaya. Just Rav used the word koimitz, that even a half a koimitz, you're not allowed to put on his bear. So what's the machlokes? Abaya Sava yesh koimitz pachas mishnei zaysim. Some kohanim are very small, so when they make kamitza, they make a kamitza of. They have small hands. They make a kamitza of one zayis, and then the Torah says kol. So it's marba that even a half a zayis is osir. That's what Abaya holds. The yeshak Torah pesucha. We go to Amud Beis pesucha pechusa mekazayis. And there's a haktorah that you could do less than a kazayas, and therefore, if you makter less than a kazayas of the sa'or, you're going to be chayev. The Rava says, "Ein kaimitz pachas mishnei zeisem." Regular kohen has big hands. A kohen has to have big hands. So when he does a kamitza, what's in his hands? 2 kazesim. So when the Torah says you could do even less, the Torah is only giving you half of that. So but the Isser to throw on the Mizbeach is nothing less than a Kazayas. So according to Rava is more lenient, that if you throw less than a Kazayas of the Sa'or on the Mizbeach, you're not liable. Only if you throw one Zayas. Whereas Abaya holds, Yesh Haktorah Pechus Kazayas, that even a half a Zayas you throw on the Mizbeach, you're liable. One more piece and then we'll stop. Itma, we learned Hamala misor dvash al gabi mizbeach. Let's say somebody mixed the seor dvash on top of the mizbeach, and so let's say he put seor, he put dvash, and then he mixed seor dvash on the mizbeach. Well, we learned that mixtures are also asa. So let's say he made a bread with honey, right? He made the bread with honey. So he put a piece of bread, he put a little honey on the mizbeach, and then he mixed the bread and honey as a separate item. So Rava says simple, loika mishum seor, v'loika mishum davash. You get an avera because of you put bread on the mizbeach and you put honey on the mizbeach, and loika mishum eruve seor v'shim eruve davash. There's an isser to put anything mixed with bread or anything mixed with honey. So you're going to get 4 malchus because you have a separate lav called the mixture of seor and the mixture of davash. So according to Rava, you get number 4. 4 malchus if you did such a situation. Abaya ama ein loikin alav shebechlolos. Abaya has this new klal that you're not going to get malchus. What does that mean? So ikad de amre Abaya, others say chada miyaloki. Abaya will say that you get at least 2. You get for the seor, you get for putting davash on the mizbeach, but you're not going to get eruve seor, eruve davash, because Abaya holds that when a Torah gives you a lav, it's very exclusive. The lav has to be only what it really says in the lav. A lav that includes other things, you're not going to get malchus. A general lav, you don't get malchus for. So therefore, only or only davash, which are written in the pasuk, you get malchus for. But the mixture is darshan from kichol and kichol. So therefore, you don't get malchus on that. That's what Abaya holds in the first lashon. The ikad the amre, and here we conclude. The chadanami loylaki, you never get malchus. The holoi miyachid lave kelav de chasima. The main lav that we learned that you get malchus, the Torah is very clear. Don't muzzle your ox when you're threshing. So there's lav de chasima. So it's very clear. One thing goes in the lav. But here, if you look at this pasuk, the pasuk says, don't put, in one pasuk, the Torah says, don't put seor, don't put davash on the mizbeach. So there are 2 things into this lav. Oh, that's a lav that includes 2 things. You're not going to get malchus on anything because that's considered like a general lav. And the rule Abaya gives you is lav shebechlolos. You ain't loikin a lav shebechlolos. You don't get malchus on a lav that includes a lot of different parts to it. So that is the machlekes between Abaya and Rava, and we'll begin Nun Tes tomorrow, Bez Hashem.